Morning, folks. Welcome to Three's Inn. So on the 17th of June, 1967, or somewhere around 10 o'clock, I suppose, I found myself parking my 1954 Packard Clipper in the parking lot at Scott Air Force Base, designated for ROTC students to park when they were attending summer camp. We weren't allowed to have vehicles there, but they did have a parking lot designated for those of us that drove. And there I was. I had a prime parking space because I was probably the first one to show up for summer camp. I was really excited about it. I was looking forward to it. For those of you that are not familiar, summer camp is a 4-week training course for those of us in ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, that we attend between our junior and senior years. So here I show up, and I left home in Rantoul, Illinois, where my folks lived. My dad was the commissary officer at Rantoul as a civilian. And by the way, that's what he did for the most part of his active duty life. So anyway, here I am this fine sunny Saturday morning, and man, I just was really excited to attend Air Force ROTC. So I get out of the car, lock it up, and leave the windows cracked a little bit, of course, and start walking across this field to this World War II barracks. Now, these World War II barracks were all lined up. They were 2-story barracks, open bay, with a very common latrine at one end. And so I'm heading over to this one where they told us to report. And I'm carrying my briefcase, and I get halfway across this field, and I see this guy standing outside. God, I can still see him today. He's standing outside on the steps that go up into the barracks, and he's got his hands on his hips. He's wearing a wheel cap, an Air Force wheel cap, and he's got khaki. We wore 1505s in those days. He's wearing khaki shirt and slacks, pants, and they are creased. I mean, they have creases in them like razor blades, I suppose, and he's wearing sunglasses. And he shouts out to the field, and he says, "Hey, asshole," he says, "when you attend my summer camp, I expect you to run." Well, I was kind of shocked at that. He couldn't be talking to me, so I turned around to see who he was talking to, because it certainly wasn't me. And then I turned back, he says, "Yes, you dipshit." So oh, okay. So I just took off in kind of a jog to kind of placate him. Ran over to the front door and walked in. And I walk in, and they had a buffet set up. You walk, name. I said, "Bob." Last name, Holliker. So, okay, fine. So I start through it, and then, "You're in D flight." Okay, that sounds good to me. So they give me 2 blankets, 2 sheets, a pillow, and some personal gear and towels, things like that. And then they give me a green D-Flight cap. That was pretty cool. And I'm working my way down the line, one station to the other, and I come walking out the back door, and they pointed me toward where our barracks was. It was around the corner and down a little bit. So I come walking out, and I've got my hands full of all this stuff. I'm just carrying this stuff like it loaded up. Barely see it. Actually, what I was doing was looking out the sides. And so I'm cautiously walk down the steps, and I start walking over toward the barracks, and I hear this, "I told you to run, asshole. Am I going to have problems with you here at this summer camp?" No, sir. So I start running. God, what a mess. Anyway, got over to D-Flight, to the barracks we're in, and of course we're in the upper floor. So I go in the door, and the stairs were right there. I go trudging up the to the upper floor, second floor, around the corner, and my bunk was way down at the far end on the bottom bunk next to a window. Okay, good. Got a window seat. So I go down there, and there's nobody else in the barracks at this time, but slowly thereafter they start to drift in. So I set everything down, and wow, this is going to be fun. And then pretty soon guys started coming in, started introducing themselves. And I knew one guy, a guy named Jerry Moody. We had played on the same Little League team in Puerto Rico years earlier when my dad was stationed at Ramey. And I was glad to see Jerry Moody, any face in a storm like that. But and we reacquainted and so forth. And then started coming together. There were 25 of us in that flight. So next thing we hear is the TAC officer, the tactical officer, Captain Robert or Bob Jekyll. Of course, we knew him as Captain Jekyll. And he comes walking up the stairs, and we all come to attention at the end of our bunks. And he starts walking up and down telling us he's the junior officer. He's been taking a lot of crap being a junior TAC officer. And he says, I'm telling you here right now, he says, you are going to be the honor flight of the camp. You're going to be honor flight every week, or you will pay for it. We didn't like the way that sounded. And it was quite motivating, though, I'll tell you that. And honor flight was quite an honor, as the name implies. It was something that we strive for. Okay, so he gave us that spiel, and he says, starting right now, he says, you know, you have an inspection in whatever, an hour or whatever. So we had to make our beds and so forth. So he came up and inspected, and of course they all failed. Okay, that was part of the drill. And then from then on, we got into it. Summer camp was 4 weeks. So, and with a major inspection at the end of each week. And they looked at how you were dressed, how your bunk area was, how the barracks was. A lot of things went into that inspection and so forth. Okay. During the week, we attended various classes on various Air Force functions. Everything from personnel to finance, the chow hall, this, that, and the other. And as the week went on, we had a great group of guys, and we just really bonded. One of the things we decided to do, we kind of came together after Captain Jekyll walked back downstairs. And what do you think? Is this something we want to do? Yeah, I want to become honor flight of the camp. Okay. So we decided then and there, one of the first things that we were going to do everything as a flight. We were going to march. Well, we had no choice but to march as a flight. But to give you an example, when we got into the chow hall, we were going to go through the food trough, get our trays filled, and we're going to walk to our assigned seats, tables and seats, and we were going to stand there until the last man came through the line. That's my grandmother's clock, by the way. I forgot to look at the time, but that clock is probably 112 years old. Anyway, enjoy it. So we determined who the fastest eaters were. We put them toward the end of the line when we went through the chow hall, and the slowest eaters went first. Okay, so what we would do is we'd just stand there until the last man walked up to his table and got a nod, and then everybody sat down as a flight. And then when everybody got finished, we stood up as a flight. Little things like that to show our flight unity. And as it turns out, it paid off big dividends. Okay. So like I said, we began melding into a flight. We had a linebacker from Pennsylvania, a guy named Sicoli. We had a brainiac from Washington University there in St. Louis. He didn't get a lot of travel pay coming from St. Louis to Scott Air Force Base, probably $1.20. Vincent T. Hornkamp, and he was a double major, physics and chemistry. Crap, I don't have any business hanging out with him. Of course, there was Jerry Moody. And then we had a guy named Fisher. Fisher cracked me up. God. And Fisher came to summer camp from the Citadel. Now, how stupid is that? The Citadel does this left, right crap all the time. Why they thought they had to send him to summer camp, I don't know. But Fisher he was kind of the grounding agent of us. He had a great sense of humor. And he was a little bit, well, I'd say he was a bubble off. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that as the video goes along here. So We're going through our briefings and so forth, and then we meet out on the parade grounds on noon at Saturday, the first Saturday, and they go through the church notes out there, and then they said the honor flight for the first week is D flight. Yeah. So we did that. Man, we were pumped. So we were pumped enough to where it was incentive for us to keep going. So the second week, we got honor flight again. And then we thought, this is too easy. And I think we let up. And third week, we didn't get it. We really slacked off. And Captain Jaco was not pleased. And so I think, wind the clock back here, it was around the second week. They started shredding us out to our personal preferences for assignment. Well, I had wanted to be a pilot, but I had gotten kind of tossed out of the flying instruction program, the FIP program, because I have an issue with color vision. I'm not color blind, but I am color deficient. So that means there's a lot of those numbers in pink and green dots I just can't see. But like I asked the flight surgeon, how many runways have you ever seen painted in pink and green dots, for crying out loud? And it didn't impress him when I asked that question, so okay, fine. So they thought, you might enjoy a career in weather. Oh, I'll bet I would. So while these other guys went to the flight line to get their rides in a T-33, they brought in a couple T-33s to give the pilot candidates rides. I was sitting up in this little tower on top of this one hangar watching clouds and watching those guys take off and land and listening to them on the radio. And I decided then and there I didn't want a career in weather. No, I'm not going to do that. So anyway, that was my experience with my career move there. I just kind of let it pass after that. In the evenings, I don't know who or how, but we discovered not far from where we were was a cafeteria. And in that cafeteria, they served beer. Well, wouldn't you know? So we would come back from the day and we'd spend a lot of time getting our area upstairs all cleaned up for the morning inspection. So we got everything all cleaned up, and then we walked downstairs and formed up in formation, lest someone get an idea that we weren't doing something not by the book. So we'd form up in formation and we'd march to the cafeteria. And then we'd go to the cafeteria and spend the night drinking beer. Oh, we had a hell of a great time doing that. And finally lights were out at 8:30, so we didn't have but an hour and a half to drink beer, but it was enough. We'd march back. And on our way, sometimes we'd have these airmen in their barracks. We had to walk by their barracks, march by their barracks. And he'd give us a load of crap. And of course, it was Fisher from the Citadel that came out with, Airmen, shine your brass, because when we through, gonna kick your ass. That kind of brought that to a little, it kind of toned it down a little bit. We had some fun with it. We had a C-141 come in one day to take us to survival camp down in South Carolina. And that was my first experience with that C-141, riding in the back on those red nylon seats, and I loved it. Man, did I love that. You know, I didn't get anywhere near the cockpit, but just being on that airplane was cool. So they fly us down to South Carolina, and they put us on Blue Gooses, those buses, and they take us about 40 miles out into the jungle somewhere, jungle swamp. It was a camp. And so they pointed at us in our designated area. We had tents to sleep in, so we set up our tents and got 3 days of instruction on Air Force survival, which is a lot like Army survival or Navy survival. Maybe not so much Navy survival. They just bob around everything. Anyway, you get the idea. So they told us that we were responsible for personal hygiene, which meant shaving, of course. Well, Horncamp had never used an electric razor, or he'd always used an electric razor. Sorry about that. He'd never used a straight razor. And I don't know if many of you remember those old Gillette razors that came out that had the razor bands on them. You kind of cracked around. Those things were lethal. Those things would cut you quicker than steel beer cans would. But anyway, Horncamp was scared to death. He was terrified of getting a demerit. Just would not, he would do anything to keep from getting a demerit. So, Sicoli, the linebacker from Penn State, gives him one of these band razors. And I'll tell you what, when he came back from the river, his face was ripped to shreds. I don't know if you ever remember Bill Cosby in that skit. He talks about, zip zop, my face is ripped to shreds. Well, his was ripped to shreds. And so he's sitting there bleeding from various cuts, and he's got toilet paper all over his face. And then Sicoli, being the ever considerate, nurturing individual he was, he gives him some aftershave. Now, why do you need aftershave in the jungle? But he gave him this aftershave, and it was just pure menthol. It was green. I can't remember the name of it because I never liked this stuff. But anyway, Horncamp put that stuff on. He started screaming, racing through that jungle. We'd never seen a guy move that fast through the J. And anyway, we got him settled down, brought him back. And I don't remember a lot about the flight back to Scott because we were all so darn tired. Most of it just slept on the way back. But that was quite an experience there. So we're going along, and we flunk, or we don't flunk. We did not get on our flight the third week. And, well, maybe we're not as good as we thought we were, but damn it, I think we are. So we all decided to buckle down and go for it on fourth week. Also, I want to back up here, a good place to tell you that on the third week, we got Liberty, if you will, on Sunday or Saturday. They gave us a day off, and most of the guys took the bus down to St. Louis and just kind of walked around St. Louis. I wasn't real shot in the head with that. I don't know. I put away my Air Force ID card and pulled out my dependent ID card. I still had my my dependent ID card from my dad's service. So I pulled that out, went over to the officers club and hung out there and really had a nice time over there. Anyway, that came to an end, and we all met back in the barracks. And then we started the last week, and we decided to tighten things up. One day at lunch, we're sitting there, and like I said, we had 25 guys. So we had 6 tables of 4, and there was always one left over. Well, that was Fisher, because he was a fast eater. He learned to speed eat at the Citadel. So we stand up, and we're standing there waiting for everybody. Fisher's standing there, and these other 3 guys that at the table he was at just started ragging on him. You guys think you're so smart, blah, 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 blah. And Fisher just stood there and kind of just ignored it. And then we sat down, we all ate. When the last guy was done and we stood up, Fisher reaches over, grabs this one kid's mashed potatoes and just mashes them in his chest. And then wipes his hand on him and gets up and walked out. The kid was so dumbfounded, he just sat there and looked at him. And Fisher walked out like nothing else had happened. A couple other little things that happened at summer camp I'll never forget. Like I said, we would line up in the barracks by our lockers at the foots of our beds. So you had 2 rows of beds, 2 rows of bunk beds, and so there were 2 of us standing by each locker. And you could kind of see down the row. Fisher was not quite right. So he's standing there one day, and Fisher stood kind of catty corner from Horncamp, and Horncamp was always so serious. Good Lord, boy, throttle back. So Fisher's standing there one morning on inspection, and he unzips his zipper on his slacks, and for the purpose of the video, he takes out his member. So he's standing there, and he starts bobbing up and down, flipping himself around like this. And Horncamp catches him, and he sees what he's doing. And Horncamp, the rest of us are rolling. I mean, it's funny. And Horncamp is just sitting there. I really got pissed off. And then Fisher's just sitting there like bobbing. Well, by the time Captain Jaco came around, he had himself cleaned up. He was standing there at attention. Nobody knew the wiser. Horncamp sitting there struggling with it all. And most of us are sitting there just trying to think of the most miserable things. The most miserable. I don't know. I've ever seen that happen. Went back to my screensaver. Must be talking too long. Anyway, went back to standing at attention and so forth. And another time, just as Captain Jekyll's coming up the stairs, Fisher walks over to Horncamp's bunk, grabs his pillow, brings it around, and hands it to him. So now Captain Jekyll is coming up the stairs and Horncamp's standing holding his pillow, and the bed has to be in inspection order. I wonder how Horncamp ever turned out. He wasn't a bad guy. It's just that guys tended to pick on him because he was so darn serious. At any rate, we ended up being honor camp of the flight for that ROTC experience, summer camp. And I'll tell you what, I just loved being part of an outstanding unit. That always felt so good. And I carried that through my Air Force career. Strive to be outstanding. The difference between excellent and outstanding is just so small. It just takes that little bit of extra effort to be outstanding. And that's what I tried to talk to my kids about and the people that work for me. Put in that little bit of effort to be outstanding, and you'll always appreciate it. So I think back at ROTC about being honor flight of the camp. And it is, even though it was a lot of years ago, it's still a source of pride for me. So that being said, I've probably said enough about summer camp and Vincent T. Horn Camp. Hope you enjoy the morning. This is Bobo, Base Gear. Stop.